A tiny rainy island, smaller than the state of Oregon, once controlled a quarter of the entire planet. It didn't just conquer it, it told the rest of the world how to live, what laws to follow, what language to speak, even which side of the road to drive on. No nuclear weapons, no massive population, for most of its history, not even the strongest army in Europe. So how did one small, damp country end up dictating how billions of people would exist on every continent on Earth? For almost all of its history, England was nobody's idea of a future superpower. It's a small, wet island sitting off the edge of a continent that already had the real players: Spain, France, the Ottomans, Ming China. In the 1500s, Spain was hauling silver out of the Americas by the shipload. The Ottoman Empire stretched from North Africa to the edge of Persia. China's economy alone was bigger than half of Europe combined. England, meanwhile, had a population smaller than modern-day London, a damp climate better suited to turnips than treasure, and a navy that mostly existed to stop other countries from invading it. Nothing about England's starting position said empire. It had no unique resources worth fighting over. Its soil wasn't especially fertile. Its population wasn't especially large. If you'd bet on which European country would end up controlling a quarter of the planet's land by 1900, England wouldn't have made anyone's shortlist in 1600. The Dutch, with their own trading fleets and financial system, looked like a far safer bet. So did the Spanish, sitting on entire mountains of American silver. And yet, 300 years later, the British Empire covered close to a quarter of the Earth's land and roughly the same share of its population. The sun famously never set on it because there was always daylight somewhere inside its borders. Egypt, India, Nigeria, Australia, Canada, huge parts of the Caribbean and the Middle East, all at some point colored the same shade of pink on a map drawn in London. Compare that to England's actual size. You could fit the island of Great Britain inside the state of Oregon and still have room left over. Meanwhile, India alone, just one colony, had a population roughly 10 times larger than England's. This wasn't a big country swallowing small ones. It was a small country somehow running a planet's worth of much bigger ones for centuries without collapsing under its own weight.
So something happened in those 3 centuries that had nothing to do with England simply being bigger, richer, or stronger to start with. It had almost nothing to do with soldiers marching in and taking territory by force either, at least not at first. The real story starts somewhere you wouldn't expect, with paperwork. In 1600, a group of London merchants got together and formed a company, not an army, a company with shareholders, a board, and a charter from the Queen. It was called the East India Company, and it's one of the strangest organizations in history, a private business that was eventually allowed to raise its own army, mint its own currency, and govern entire regions of India as if it were a government. Britain didn't invade India, a corporation did, and the British government backed it, taxed it, and eventually took it over once it got too big and too profitable to leave alone. This became the pattern. Time and again, empire wasn't planned from a war room. It was built by trading companies chasing profit, with the state stepping in later to protect the investment. That only explains part of it, though. Companies need money to operate at that scale, and here's where England had a genuinely weird advantage nobody else had figured out yet. It got really, really good at borrowing money. In 1694, England created something new, the Bank of England, specifically to let the government borrow cheaply and reliably from its own citizens. Investors trusted that the loans would be repaid, so they kept lending at lower and lower interest rates. Spain, by comparison, kept defaulting on its debts. France's finances were a mess right up until they triggered a revolution. Cheap, reliable credit meant England could fund a bigger navy, more expeditions, more colonial ventures, all without emptying the royal treasury. It was financing an empire on credit, while its rivals were still counting gold coins. Then came the piece that actually sealed it, the Industrial Revolution. Starting in the late 1700s, Britain figured out how to mechanize production, steam power, textile mills, iron and coal on an industrial scale, roughly a century before anyone else caught up. That gap mattered enormously. A British factory could produce cloth cheaper and faster than a hand weaver anywhere else on Earth, including in countries that had been making textiles for centuries, like India. Britain didn't just sell goods to its colonies, it restructured entire local economies to feed its factories raw materials and buy back the finished product, a one-way relationship that made colonies more valuable than any battlefield conquest.
Take tea. Britain didn't grow it, China did. And for a long time, China wanted almost nothing Britain had to sell in return, only silver. So British merchants found something else the Chinese market would take: opium, grown in British-controlled India and shipped in on a massive scale, whether the Chinese government wanted it or not. When China tried to ban it, Britain went to war over the right to keep selling it, twice, and won both times. That's not a footnote, that's the empire's business model in miniature. Identify a profitable trade, and if anyone gets in the way, that's what the Navy is for. And here's the part almost nobody mentions. Britain rarely governed these places directly. Ruling a country of hundreds of millions of people with a home population of maybe 30 million is basically impossible by brute force. So Britain relied on something much cheaper than an occupying army: local elites. Find the existing kings, chiefs, princes, or landowners, offer them money, status, and protection, and let them keep running things day to day, as long as they answered to London. It's called indirect rule, and it's astonishingly efficient. A handful of British administrators, backed by local rulers who'd been bought into the system, could manage populations thousands of times larger than themselves. There was one more trick, and it's the coldest one: turning local groups against each other. In India, colonial administrators actively emphasized and hardened divisions between Hindus and Muslims that had been far more fluid before British rule. In Nigeria, they favored certain ethnic groups for administrative jobs and military recruitment over others. Divided populations don't unite against the people ruling them. It's a strategy historians now simply call divide and rule, and versions of it show up in nearly every territory Britain ever controlled.
Put those pieces together: a private company doing the conquering, a state that could borrow money cheaper than anyone else, an industrial economy nobody could compete with, local elites doing the actual governing, and populations kept too divided to unite against any of it. And you don't need to be the strongest army in Europe. You need to be the best organized bookkeeper. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. When the empire started coming apart in the 20th century, the people drawing its exit paperwork were, once again, mostly British officials, and they were in a hurry. Look at a map of the Middle East, and you'll find suspiciously straight lines cutting through deserts, drawn by British and French officials in 1916, in a secret deal splitting up Ottoman territory with barely any input from the people who actually lived there. Look at the border between India and Pakistan, drawn by a British lawyer who had never set foot in India before, given 5 weeks to divide a subcontinent of hundreds of millions of people. He finished the boundary, went home, and reportedly never spoke publicly about it again. The partition that followed displaced an estimated 15 million people and killed hundreds of thousands. Nigeria's borders lumped together over 250 ethnic groups, with no shared history of governing themselves as one country. Much of Africa's map is basically a set of ruler straight lines agreed on by European diplomats in Berlin in 1884, dividing the continent without a single African representative in the room. This is the part that doesn't show up in the highlight reel of empire. A huge share of the conflicts that make the news today, border disputes, civil wars, sectarian violence, trace back not to ancient hatred, but to lines drawn on a map by people who never set foot in the places they were dividing. The same year as the Sykes-Picot line was drawn through the Middle East, Britain also promised a homeland for the Jewish people inside a territory it had also promised, separately, to Arab leaders in exchange for their support. Two incompatible promises about the same land, made a year apart, are still fueling one of the world's most persistent conflicts a century later. And it's not just borders. Britain left behind an operating system that quietly runs in the background of the modern world. Common law, the legal framework behind courts in the US, India, Canada, Australia, and dozens of other countries, is British in origin. Driving on the left is still standard in over 50 countries, almost all former colonies. English itself, spoken by over 1 billion people as a first or second language, spread through exactly this same colonial infrastructure, before trade, technology, and American influence carried it the rest of the way.
Even economies still carry the shape of it. Colonial administrators often set up territories to produce exactly one export: cocoa, cotton, rubber, sugar, and ship it to British factories, rather than build local industries that could process it themselves. Decades after independence, a striking number of former colonies still rely heavily on exporting one or two raw materials, a structural echo of a system designed to feed a factory 4,000 miles away, not to build a self-sufficient economy at home. The empire is gone. Nobody flies its flag anymore, but the architecture it built, legal systems, economic dependencies, and the borders themselves never really got dismantled. It just changed ownership. So go back to that map you pictured at the start. Those borders you've always treated as fixed, as natural, as just how the world is. Most of them are barely 100 years old, and a striking number of them were decided in rooms in London by men holding rulers, not by the people who'd actually have to live inside them. Britain didn't conquer the world because it was the strongest, the smartest, or the most advanced civilization on Earth. It conquered it because it got remarkably good at 3 unglamorous things: lending money cheaply, outsourcing conquest to private companies, and paying local rulers to do the governing for it. None of that requires being exceptional. It just requires being organized, patient, and comfortable playing a very long game while everyone else is still thinking in terms of battles. No armies marching triumphantly into your daily life, just paperwork, debt, and a few well-placed signatures, quietly redrawing the planet, one contract at a time. The next time you look at a world map, remember, you're not looking at geography, you're looking at somebody's old invoice.